What does it take to lead men into the absolute chaos of battle? Welcome to BN Beyond. Today, we're taking a deeply immersive, totally unvarnished look into a profound piece of military history. We're diving into War Dispatches, the Indo-Pak Conflict 1965, written by Lt Gen Harbaksh Singh. General Singh was one of the most respected Indian commanders of the war, and his first-hand account brings an immediate, undeniable gravity to the events of 1965. Listen, this isn't some glossy, romanticized retrospective. What we're looking at is the raw, brutal reality of the battlefield, seen directly through the eyes of a field commander who was right in the thick of it.
I want you to really think about this for a second. What does it actually feel like to stand at the very edge of war, knowing that every single decision you make is going to alter history? Try to step into the shoes of a military commander for just a moment. You're facing this immense, crushing pressure of an impending conflict. You have to prepare for danger before the nation even fully realizes it's in danger. In this explainer, we are going completely beyond the patriotic headlines and the standard textbook summaries. We're looking for the impartial, ground-level truth.
So we'll be exploring the harsh operational realities, the nightmare of logistics, and the impossible leadership dilemmas of the 1965 conflict. General Singh's account fundamentally changes how we understand war, how we view command and courage, and it really highlights that incredibly fragile balance between military strategy and political maneuvering.
Section 1. The Road to War.
You know, massive conflicts like this don't just erupt out of thin air. They grow from a slow, simmering buildup of mutual suspension. Look at the timeline here. Early in 1965, the tension sparked with skirmishes in the Rann of Kutch. Then, by mid-1965, things escalated with covert infiltration into Kashmir. Finally, by late 1965, all of these escalating tensions and political miscalculations completely boiled over. What was once a highly sensitive border was transformed into a theater of full-scale open war. The initial calm of political speeches was just completely shattered against the harsh reality of actual border deployments.
At this stage of the conflict, the fighting in Kashmir wasn't your traditional line-up-and-shoot kind of battle. It was a sophisticated, covert infiltration strategy. The whole goal was to blend trained personnel directly into the local population to create sudden, massive disruption and confusion. And because of the rugged, mountainous terrain, conventional firepower basically took a back seat. It forced Indian commanders to pivot entirely. They had to rely heavily on rapid, intelligence-based responses and immense psychological resilience just to counter this hidden, unpredictable enemy.
And this really highlights the commander's central dilemma. As General Singh so astutely noted, a local security problem can spiral into a national emergency in the blink of an eye if it isn't handled intelligently. Managing border security means walking a razor-thin line. You have to avoid overreaction, because that could spark a wider war prematurely, right? But at the same time, you have to maintain an incredibly firm, flexible state of readiness. It's a tremendous balancing act.
Section 2. The Western Front escalates.
Now, as that covert infiltration strategy failed to achieve its goals in Kashmir, the conflict violently widened to the decisive, flat plains of Punjab. And why Punjab? Well, from a strategic standpoint, its flat terrain was practically custom-built for large-scale armored warfare. It also housed absolutely critical supply routes and arteries. Plus, the psychological stakes for both militaries in this region were just absolute. The battle for the Punjab plains became the ultimate chessboard of this war. Literally, every single square mile held massive operational and political value, which demanded a constant, exhausting balance of playing defense while launching counteroffensives.
Let's break down the brutal reality of armored warfare on that flat terrain. Because contrary to popular belief, tanks alone do not win wars. Combined arms operations are an absolute must for survival. Think of it like a lethal puzzle. Step 1, you deploy your tanks for that initial shock and speed. But Step 2 is crucial. You have to coordinate seamlessly with your infantry units. And Step 3, you sustain that forward momentum with highly targeted artillery support. Without that incredibly tight, synchronized coordination, those massive, heavily armored tanks just become exposed, highly vulnerable targets sitting in the dust and smoke. This brings us to a really fascinating strategic crossroad. Do you maintain a purely defensive posture, or do you launch a calculated counteroffensive? Human instinct might scream at you to just protect your borders, dig in, and preserve your combat power. But the strategic necessity of war often dictates pushing forward, and in this case that meant pushing toward Lahore. Why would you risk that? Well, to force the enemy to divert their resources, to make them lose their initiative, and to make them feel the pressure of the war on their own side of the border. It's a highly disciplined application of force designed specifically to regain balance.
Section 3.
The fog of war. Okay, we're pivoting now from tactical maneuvers on the ground to the absolute operational nightmare of running a war from the top. You hear the phrase fog of war thrown around a lot, but what does that actually mean on the ground? It is the daily, grinding operational challenge where critical messages arrive hours late, orders are completely misunderstood, and battlefield reports frequently contradict each other. This is crucial to understand. General Singh's commanders weren't playing a video game with perfect visibility. They had to make literal life or death decisions based on incomplete, chaotic, and often totally confusing information. And that chaotic reality perfectly sets up our next major contrast. As a society, we heavily romanticize frontline heroism. We focus on the courage and the incredible sacrifice happening right at the edge of battle, and rightly so. But we have to consider the cold, hard logistical reality. Without ammunition, without fuel, transport, and properly functioning medical support chains running perfectly behind the scenes, well, all of that frontline heroism is quickly and tragically squandered.
This critical point is perfectly captured by General Singh himself. He wrote, "Strategy without logistics is fantasy." That line right there is one of the absolute core takeaways from these dispatches. It honors the completely invisible, deeply unglamorous supply work that, at the end of the day, quietly dictates whether an army achieves victory or suffers defeat.
Section 4. The burden of command. Transitioning into the deeply human element of this conflict, we start to see that command is a profound moral and intellectual burden. It is absolutely not about rank or shiny medals or glory. Leaders are forced to interpret that incomplete data we talked about, and they have to absorb massive, terrifying amounts of risk without suffering an emotional collapse. When the front lines are rapidly shifting and events are spiraling totally beyond your control, a commander has to maintain an ironclad, disciplined mind. Because if they become emotionally detached, they lose their credibility with their troops. But if they become reactive and impulsive, they lose their effectiveness.
And we can never forget that behind every single operational decision are real, breathing people. The human cost of 1965 was staggering. We're talking about soldiers lost, wounded, or missing in action. We're talking about the heavy, suffocating emotional toll on the families waiting anxiously back home. And think about the units on the ground, grieving units who have just lost friends, but are forced to just pack up and keep fighting. What the commander must understand is that every strategic movement on a general's map represents actual human lives. The true strength of an army lies in its ability to keep functioning despite enduring this immense, collective pain.
General Singh wrote that without memory, sacrifice becomes mere statistics. It's a sobering thought. He was absolutely insistent that military history must preserve the human face of war. It can't just be numbers on a page. Remembering the human cost is the only way to truly honor the men who stood in the line of fire and didn't come back.
Section 5. Ceasefire and Strategic Lessons.
As we analyze the sobering realities of the war's aftermath, a very stark contrast emerges. A ceasefire effectively freezes the battlefield, right? It halts the act of gunfire and stops the troop movements. But, as General Singh so critically points out, a ceasefire does not necessarily settle the conflict. In fact, it often completely fails to resolve the underlying political and territorial ambiguities that caused the war in the very first place. So that immediate, overwhelming relief of silence on the battlefield is very quickly met with the grim realization of unfinished political business.
And from that unfinished business, we pull the enduring lessons of 1965. General Singh leaves future generations with some absolutely vital takeaways. First, the absolute necessity of integrated command structures. Second, the crucial, undeniable role of reserve strength and logistics. Third, the vital importance of maintaining highly realistic views of enemy capabilities. Do not underestimate who you're fighting. And perhaps the most important lesson of all, rejecting flattering, feel-good propaganda in favor of brutally honest self-assessments. You have to acknowledge your vulnerabilities if you actually want to improve your national defense.
Which brings us to an incredibly powerful concluding thought from the general. A nation becomes stronger not only by fighting well, but by remembering well. It's such a profound statement. True strategic growth, the kind that actually protects a nation, requires looking in the mirror and facing the unvarnished truth of your own history.
So I'll leave you with this question to really chew on. How can modern nations learn honestly from their wartime experiences, rather than just hiding behind flattering, comfortable narratives? General Harbaksh Singh's dispatches are literal masterclass in realistic, grounded leadership under the most extreme pressure imaginable. Thank you for joining me for this explainer here on Being and Beyond, and I truly hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity to learn even more about this pivotal moment in history.